Welcome back. This is Isaac, and you're watching ACT Reading Prep. The last time we've embarked upon the social studies or social sciences passages, and we've realized that it's about the same as the prose fiction in a sense that all we need to do is try to connect the dots as we read into the passages, right? But one thing is different is that social sciences will deal with a lot of social or various social issues. And the last two that we have tackled was about the American government and American Constitution, and of course American figures, American historical figures such as Jefferson. And so again, this social sciences will have a varied topics upon a lot of social issues. And today we're going to tackle some of the other issues, or at least it's U.S. related, but it's still is not really history related, or it's not government related, but it has to do with just general stuff, but it's about U.S. anyways. And so you realize that ACT topics or ACT social studies topics and some of the humanity topics will deal with American environment, American situations, that things that are happening in America. Okay, of course that it's in comparison with things that happen around the world. And so keep that in mind. It's very important for you to realize that, because in order for you to solve easier, and in order for you to better comprehend the passages, it would be prudent for you to know the background information in which the passages will discuss. All right. So therefore, what we want to do is we want to know a little bit about the details, or a little bit about the backgrounds of the passages, and so that we have a good understanding, right? But of course, background knowledge is just a little bit of a portion of the actual understanding. It's the actual reading the first sentence of the last sentence of the first paragraph and the first sentences of the rest of the paragraph to understand and connect the dots between the passages, so that you get the full, not just full, but a flow of the idea and the comprehension, or at least the connecting of the dots, so that you understand the trend of the story, how it goes, and how each of the paragraph deals with the topic. All right, so let's get started with today's lesson. Today's lesson will be on pages 468 to 469, and this is of course social science related topic. All right, let's move on to the first passage. So passage 2, same thing happens here again, of course. Always pay attention to this part, right? Social science. This passage is adapted from Biomimicry, Innovation Inspired by Nature by Janine M. Benyus. All right, so maybe she's American, maybe she's not, right? We don't know for that, or we don't know for sure who she is. But again, the writer becomes unimportant, because she's just a not nobody per se, but we don't know her by name. We don't recognize her by name. So let's just put that aside. But I guess the important part is biomimicry, innovation inspired by nature, right? So what is a biomimicry? Biomimicry is copying from the nature. So copying from the nature meaning, for example, there were a couple of years ago, I think it was not even a couple of years ago, about a decade ago, Japanese engineers have built a robot fish. And this robot fish was taken after the actual fish movement, right? The fin movement, the swirling movement of the dorsal fins and the posterior, the tail fins, right? And so they have built this by mimicking the actual live fish, right? So here, I guess what we're talking about when we say biomimicry, we're copying the actual nature, and of course, innovation inspired by nature. So there are a lot of things that are being inspired by nature, and so let's take a look at that and see what the passage talks about, right? So the first thing, of course, is to realize that the first paragraph is an introductory paragraph that we need to read the first sentence and the last sentence of the paragraph. So the first sentence states, "If anybody is growing biomass, it's us." Excuse me. So when we say biomass, of course, we're talking about energy source built up from organic materials, right? Although yes, fuel, or of course oil as we know it, is an organic material, it's not really derived from, well, it is derived from, I mean, if you really think about it, oil has been, it's been, say, preserved for millions and millions of years. And of course, it happened as a result of biomass, or at least the death of the dinosaurs, the death of trees, and death of all the other animals. They've been compacted within the earth, and they've been pressurized, and they've been cooked, so to speak, right? They've been cooked to become oil. And so therefore, they could be considered a biomass, but we can, what we can't do is we can't really recreate that situation, right? We can't really recreate that environment, but we could in some ways try to recreate this biomass, so to speak, right? So we have things like biodiesels, right? It's not really being used that commercially, but we do actually have biodiesels which are created from corn. Plant materials, right? So, I mean, that's what we call biomass. So if anybody's growing biomass, it's us. So I don't know who this us is referring to, but it could be us as in US, right? Because I don't know if she's a US citizen, but she could be US, or it could be human beings as a whole, right? But anyways, we're growing biomass and we're actually growing it, right? And then go to the last page or last sentence of the first paragraph. It says the first examples of this no waste economy are collections of companies clustered in an eco park and connected in a food chain, with each firm's waste going next door to become the other firm's raw material or fuel. So I guess we're talking about the examples of the no waste economy. So I bet here the entire passage will deal with the no waste economy. Now, of course, the economy right now is a wasteful economy in which we waste a lot of things, right? For example, oil or fuel is burnt and then there's no use for it. It's simply discarded, or it's simply let go. And so therefore, the economy right now is what we call an open loop. So, open loop, or if that sounds weird, it's an open market, or it's at least a waste market or waste economy, because we're wasting everything. If you get the raw materials and the raw materials are used to build something, that something, when it's expired, or when it's necessity, or when it's expired of the use, right? And it'll be discarded by people. And apparently, I don't know if you know this already, but apparently a lot of plastics, a lot of like recyclable goods that you actually, try to, like really, separate from the actual trash to the recyclables, right? It's apparently that not many of those, not even 30% of those recyclable goods are being recycled, because there's simply lack of technology. There's simply, maybe technology part was maybe a decades ago. So maybe let's get rid of the technology, but there's a lack of funding, there's lack of facilities, there's lack of just everything, right? So therefore it's not being done well. So here, I guess what we're talking about is an example of a no waste economy in which collections of companies are clustered. They've been put into an eco park in which they become sort of like a food chain connected, and then each firm's waste becomes the fuel for the next company, and then the next company, and then the next company, and the next company. All right, so let's see how that works, right? At least the passage will talk about that. Let's go to the second paragraph, and the talk begins with Denmark. So in Denmark, the town of Kalundborg has the world's most elaborate prototype of an eco park. So I guess in Denmark, especially the town of Kalundborg, there is an example, or a prototype is an example, of course. Prototype is initial example of this eco park. All right. So maybe the details will be mentioned here, but let's not really care about that right now. We can come back to it anytime we want to. So again, the flow of the first and second idea is that we're talking about the biomass, in the very first beginning, or very beginning, but then it comes around and talks about the first example of an eco park, or example of a no waste economy. Building an eco park so that the collections of companies clustered together could share resources, and one company's waste becomes other companies' fuel, right? And then they talk about an actual example in Denmark, in the town of Kalundborg. All right, let's move on to the next. The third paragraph says, waste steam from the power company is used by Novo Nordisk to heat the fermentation tanks that produce insulin and enzymes. So I guess this is just part of an example of how this economy works, right? So I guess waste steam from the power companies. So power companies have this waste steam, of course. You know how usually the power plants work, right? Power plants are usually creating heat and then boiling water, and then steam is created, and then steam will be used to turn the turbines. Usually, that's how it goes. It's same for the hydro. Well, it's different from hydroelectric power plants, but it's same for the power plants that burn fuels such as oil and coal and whatever. And it's the same with the nuclear power plants as well. Nuclear power plants do work in that principle, right? So, anyways. We're talking about power companies wasting steam used by Novo Nordisk. I don't know what kind of company that is, but that's nonetheless a company, right? To heat the fermentation tank. So whatever they're fermentating, it's going to be heating the fermentation because fermentation is catalyzed by heat. And so that produce insulin and enzymes. So I guess Novo Nordisk is some kind of a pharmaceutical company in which it produces the artificial insulin as well as the enzymes, right? Okay, good. So that's just one of the examples. So that's how it goes in the third paragraph. And then the fourth paragraph, same. Meanwhile, as it's happening, back at the Statoil refinery, right? So there's something called the Statoil refinery. Waste gas that used to go up a smokestack is now purified. So again, this is another example of this eco-park system or eco-park ecosystem in which all these different companies are being run together and they share resources, and one company's waste becomes the other company's fuel, right? So anyways, Statoil refinery, they used to have this waste gas that would go up the smokestack, meaning they would just, openly, they would just send it to the open air. Now is purified. So there's a reason why it's being purified, right? Of course, for the environment and for probably some reason that we don't know that will follow in this paragraph. So far we have established that the first paragraph talks about one of these eco parks, and the second paragraph starts with the eco park in Denmark, Kalundborg, or town of Kalundborg. And then they talk about how it actually happens, right? The waste steam from the power company goes to Novo Nordisk, which is like a pharmaceutical company which produces artificial insulin and enzyme. And then meanwhile, Statoil refinery waste gas are actually being refined, or at least purified, right? Okay, good. Let's move on to the next paragraph. This one. Although Kalundborg is a cozy co-location, industries need not be geographically close to operate in a food web as long as they are connected by a mutual desire to use waste. And so there they give you a challenge, right? This is a challenge. It says Kalundborg is a cozy co-location, meaning it's a nice little community, right? I mean, most of the companies are being close together, I'm pretty sure. But industries need not to do this. You need not to be geographically close to operate in this closed loop, or in this close or no waste economy, because all they need to have would be a mutual desire to use waste, right? That's all. Because waste could be transported. They could be transported via pipe, or they could be transported via truck, or whatever they could possibly do to transport this, right? So therefore, that's what they're saying. And of course, a little bit more of an, explanation. And then the next paragraph, so far, we've talked about recycling within a circle of companies. So of course, when you have that word so far, you know that so far, until now, we've been talking about recycling within the circles of companies, but now we're going to talk about something else, of course, and that's why you have but, right? So anyways, I guess they're now transitioning into a next phase. The first phase was talking about the companies in Kalundborg sharing resources and waste materials so that they could have this closed loop economy, right? But now what they're talking about is, so far we've been talking about that, but now we're going to talk about something else, and so maybe it's prudent for us to read that part, right? But what happens when a product leaves the manufacturer and passes to the consumer, and finally to the trash can? So I think we're talking about now, okay, the companies can do that, all right, all they want. I mean, companies can do that and try to save the environment and try to save everything. I mean, that's fine. But what happens if a product is formed and this product is sent to the consumer, or it's consumed by the consumer, and once the consumer uses it up and they have to throw it out and into the trash can, then what happens, right? Like I told you, recycling doesn't really happen. 30% only of whatever that you try to separate into recyclable goods are being processed as a recyclable goods, right? For example, the PET can or PET plastic bottles, right? The Coke bottles and the Sprite bottles. I mean, all those plastic bottles, they don't really get, they don't really get to be recycled. I mean, it's really impossible not impossible per se, but it's really hard to reprocess that into plastic that we can use again, right? So therefore, all we are doing is we're just separating so that it doesn't really get disposed of in a very inappropriate manner. So we can dispose of the plastic materials in a very appropriate manner. We're trying to separate that as a recyclable good, right? Of course, aluminum cans, glass materials, they could be all used again essentially, but PET plastics, it's really hard. But anyways, that's what we're talking about. So what happens then? So what's the right thing to do? Let's move on to the next paragraph. Traditionally, manufacturers haven't had to worry about what happens to a product after it leaves their gates. And so I guess we're talking about a long time ago, right? I mean, even now, companies don't really care about what happens to their products after it leaves their gate, meaning after they've sold it to the consumers, they don't really care anymore. And of course, I guess to me, that sounds like it's a problem. They should care about something because what we're talking about, after all, is to reuse the waste materials so that we don't waste anything, right? So that we don't waste anything, meaning we could save money and we could save the environment. But when you say manufacturers haven't had to really worry about these things, I guess they're disagreeing. Now you should worry about it. That's why we have but again, but that is starting to change, right? So anyways, all right, so that's starting to change, meaning that companies now have to really take care of whatever they made up, right? Or whatever they made, and then they really have to take care of, it's like an aftercare, all right? So anyways, let's move on to the next paragraph, the last paragraph. When the owner shifts in this way, it is suddenly in the company's best interest to design a product that will either last a long time or come apart easily for recycling or reuse. All right, so again, if whatever this trend continues or shifts in this way, right, what the companies will have to do is they'll have to design a product that will last a long time and that it will come apart easily so that they could recycle it easily or reuse it easily, right? Although that sounds like the best idea, or although that sounds like the best scenario, it doesn't really work that way, because if you know a little bit about economy and how people are trying to profit from everything, I don't think some of the companies are willing to do so. Some of the companies are willing to spend that money, right? Spend that extra money, extra income, or extra profit they have in order to treat these materials. And if they build something that will last long time, there's simply no point. I mean, you have to build something that doesn't last too long, that doesn't last too short. It's just right in the middle, so that they could sell this again and again and again and make more profits, right? That's the point of businesses, and that's the point of why they do business, right? To sell it over and over and over again. So in this sense, this is almost impossible. In this economy, that is. In the economy that we have right now, this will be virtually impossible, because there's simply no way that the companies will give up on the profits that they can get when they sell it again and again and again. Right? So anyways, but this is the best scenario in which, if this continues, like for example, this has started to change. If this starts to change in company, I mean, we don't even have to read this. Companies start to care about what they made, and they do an aftercare services. Then of course, what happens is that the companies will start to design things that will last a long time, and also they will it will come apart easily for recycling and reusing, and so on and on and on. All right, so we've understood the passage in a way that we should, right? I mean, we don't know the details per se, but we know how it goes. So first half of the passage talks about companies, the companies that are clustered together in an eco park or ecosystem, that they work together, right? They work together in a closed loop. So one company's waste becomes the other company's fuel, and then again and again and again and again, right? So that's the first half of the paragraph. The second part of the paragraph talks about how consumers are also in this. How, what happens when the product leaves the company, or leaves the plant, the factory, right? So they're talking about that, and then they say traditionally manufacturers didn't really have to care about it, but I guess that's changing. They really care about it, and if that continues, then these positive things will happen. That's the flow of the story. And let's go to the question and see if we can use that in solving the questions. And of course, we'll have to come back to some parts, definitely some parts of the passage to understand or to get a answer in an easier and a faster sense. All right, so let's go to the first question. Number 11. According to the passage, waste emissions from the... Now, I really have a hard time pronouncing a Danish or at least whatever their language is, right? So it's Asnæsverket Power Plant or Power Company, right? I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. That doesn't sound right, but Asnæsverket Power Company are used to help produce all of the following except for one, right? So let's think about it in a common sense, right? So insulin, you saw it. You saw insulin as part of a sentence that we read, right? So Novodisk, for example, there was a Novodisk, right? Was it Novo Nordisk? So Novo Nordisk was probably a pharmaceutical company producing insulin and other enzymes, right? You saw that, other enzymes. So insulin, we saw that. So definitely it was found within the passage. So therefore, yes, help produce that. I'm pretty sure they do, because if that's one of the companies that are in a closed loop together, that's a possibility. Now, heating oil, plant fertilizer, and then industrial gypsum. All right, so that's something questionable, but I bet plant fertilizer, if you remember, well, let's just try to find it again, all right? Let's not try to jump to the conclusions, but let's try to find these words, all right? Now, for example, let's talk about the question type first of all. The question type is what we call a detailed question, but it's a negative detailed question. So what you're finding is you're finding the one that's not true, right? And so definitely what you're finding is you're finding the one that doesn't really have an impact in the passage, and it doesn't really appear within the passage. So the best way of solving this question is to find these keywords: insulin, heating oil, plant fertilizer, industrial gypsum, all right? And see if they appear there. If they appear, then they are not likely your answer. But if they don't, or they have a very weak position within the paragraph or within the passage, then they might be your answer, all right? So in order to figure this out, we have to go find the Asnæsverket Power Company, right? Not just that power company, but the closed loop of companies. And we have to find heating oil, plant fertilizer, and industrial gypsum, right? Let's see if we can find that. Let's go to this paragraph, because that's where it begins, right? This paragraph begins the actual, the companies, listing of the companies, right? Because you find Asnæsverket Power Company, right? And then you find Novo Nordisk, and you find Statoil Refinery, right? You have anything else? All right, so for now, there are 4 companies, so there must be 4 companies, but let's try to find those other companies later on, right? All right, so the second thing that you will have to do is now you will try to find the actual words, right? So for example, we'll probably go to the next one, because that's probably where the question or where the words might be, right? So let's see. Novo Nordisk, right? Fermentation tanks that produces insulin and enzymes, and then Novo bequeathed free to the farmers a pipeline delivered fertilizers to a growing plant. So fertilizer, definitely, right? Plant fertilizer or fertilizer, I mean, you know, it's just the semantics. Because if you think about it, fertilizers are used in plants, not in animals, right? I mean, animals don't eat fertilizers, or for that matter, you, right? So therefore, fertilizer is definitely plant related. And so therefore, if one of these companies produces fertilizers, then yes, it helps produce it, right? So therefore, what we're going to do is we're going to make this one as not an answer, right? So these two are not an answer. So it's either between heating oil and industrial gypsum, right? Okay, let's go back. So it's dumped into whatever. Now, Statoil Refinery, since refineries are where the oil gets refined and whatnot, right? So probably we'll see that idea there, right? So let's try to find, or let's just try to read through and find heating oil. Heating oil, it's not really heating oil anywhere. But then again, you have something called the industrial gypsum here, right? Industrial gypsum, it's calcium sulfate, right? So, okay. So industrial gypsum is produced, and therefore somehow they are used, because which it sells to Gyprock for wallboard, right? So therefore Gyprock is another one of those companies, because there are 4 companies, right? So they sell it to that. So therefore, yeah, industrial gypsum also does work, right? So therefore, industrial gypsum is also one of those materials produced by this power company. So one thing that is not probably heating oil. Now, of course, it doesn't sound right, and as well as it doesn't really appear, and rest of the answer choices have already appeared, and so therefore your answer has to be heating oil, right? Heating oil is not really necessary per se, and also it doesn't really appear within the passages. All right, okay, move on to the next question, number 12. When the author says our system in lines 1 and 2, she is most likely referring to a production system so production system of what, right? So let's go back. Since we already have read it, I mean, we should know it, but for the sake of understanding, let's move on to lines number 1 and 2 and see what our system is supposed to be. All right. So it says, if anybody's growing biomass, it's us. To keep our system from collapsing on itself, industrial ecologists are attempting to build a no-waste economy. Of course, we know that our economy is going to collapse on us, right? I mean, it could be a possibility. I mean, there could be a way out. I don't know exactly because I'm not an economist, or I'm not a person who's studying economy. Although I have studied a little bit of economy, I can't be sure that whether this economy will continue. I mean, if this continues, then it's going to be a miracle. But if it doesn't continue, we'll have to come up with something else. But I don't see really a viable, other viable philosophy or other viable economic system in which it will work. And so therefore we need to work on something, right? But anyways, that's what they're saying. So to keep our system from collapsing on itself, so I think the writer is talking about our system as a system which is wasting a lot of materials, system that doesn't really work, system that is just wasting everything, and like not saving the materials, not saving the resources, but using up resources in an easy sense and polluting the environment, and so on and on and on and on. So okay, so we get the system now. So if that is our system, so we're talking about or referring to a production system in which Denmark, in which 4 companies are co-located in one small town and are linked by their dependence on energy resources. No, that's what we want to have, not our current system. So G, the United States that produces recyclable, durable goods such as refrigerators, washers, and cars. Well, it could be a possibility, but I think we're talking about our system in itself, so let's give it a 2 bar, right? 4 bar being one of the best answers, and 2 bar being, 1 bar being, lesser of an answer. H, United States and Europe in which products are developed with few virgin raw materials and leave little or no waste. So it says little or no waste, but that's not true, so we'll give it just 2 bar. Not so sure, right? And J, the United States and Europe that uses too many virgin raw materials and produces too much unused waste. That sounds right, because when we say virgin raw materials, these are raw materials that are not recycled. These are new, right? These are new materials that are being used, and so therefore this will get at least 4 bars. And so therefore let's try to figure out why these are not right. AG of course says recyclable and durable goods. If that were true, then we should be able to let this economy work, or at least this economy should work, but that's not true, right? So therefore, no, we're talking about our system in which the system does not really make use of the reusable goods or recyclable goods or waste materials to run the economy. It's not that system, so definitely not. United States and Europe, which produces or products are developed with few virgin raw materials. That's not true. We use a lot of virgin materials and leave little or no waste. That's not true. We leave a lot of waste, right? So therefore this is definitely out of the question. So of course your answer will become J, because of course J is what our system is like today. It's not just Europe and United States, it's all around the world. China does this as well, Korea does this as well. I mean, all the countries are doing this. Of course, some of the countries are doing its best to try to conserve energy, to try to use the waste materials, try to regulate the carbon content of the factories. I mean, the fumes that come out from the factories and whatnot. But it's not really working that well, because if you think about it, businesses are all about profits, and they don't really care about the environment or whatnot, right? I mean, that's why there is these hoax about global warming. Is it real, right? I mean, it's not really real. Or some people say it's like a natural process which happens over periods of time, and now it's starting to become, it started to warm up. It's not necessarily the human beings and human activities that will that will have an impact on the global warming. Well, that could be true. It couldn't be. I mean, it could be false. But again, whatever happens or whatever is happening right now, human beings are responsible for some of the devastating environmental disasters, right? I mean, for example, you probably heard the plastic island off the coast of California. I mean, although it's far away into the Pacific Ocean, you see this huge pile of plastics that have come together and that have actually created an island. And of course, not good, because these plastic bottles and caps, those plastic caps have been swallowed by seagulls and seabirds alike, and they're dying off of it. And these plastics somehow they get somehow dissolved in the seawater, and they get dissolved in waters as well, and they get into our water supplies and systems. And it's really bad. And so anyways, that's what we're talking about. All right, let's move on to the next. 13. The main purpose of the second, the third, and the fourth. We already know what's the second and the third and the fourth, right? We have somehow classified or separated the paragraphs into that manner, but second and the third and the fourth talks about the example of the eco park in Denmark, right? It does talk about the examples in Denmark. So what function does it serve, right? So what's the main purpose of the second, third, and paragraph? So if you look at A, it says how 4 companies depend on each other for resources and recycling waste. That's true, so we'll put it about 3 bars. And then B, Denmark is one of the world's leaders in developing new sources of energy. Well, not really. Our topic is not about Denmark being one of the world's leaders in developing new sources of energy, right? So definitely, we'll just give it a 1 bar. If there's a possibility, then it's Denmark, right? And C, that one town's need for energy can be eliminated through recycling. Well, yeah, that's a possibility. And then D, that no waste economy saves money. Well, not really. It will save money, definitely, but it doesn't mention about Denmark in that way. So which one of these has the most mark or most bars? The A has the most bars, and let's see if that's the answer. Of course, that's the answer, right? So if you take a look at that, of course, the 3 bars, because it's 4 companies in Denmark that depend on each other for resources and recycling of the waste materials, right? So therefore, definitely the answer has to be A. Simple as that, right? I'm pretty sure you're getting this. You're getting the hang of it. You're getting that pattern. You're getting, how to solve this question. I'm hoping that you can make it yours so that you can solve it in a faster manner, right? And more accurate, of course. All right, let's go to the next question, number 14. It is reasonable to infer. Now, this is what we call inference question, and we've looked at this, previous time and time again. Inference question is for you to guess, right? So you're guessing, but you're guessing off of the passage, not on your own, right? If you do it on your own, most likely you'll get it wrong. So that you infer that the author's proposed solution to what she sees as the problem of an increasing amount of biomass. All right. So biomass, again, is, in a good sense, biomass is something that is it's like a dead pile of organic materials. But I guess in this sense, she sees a problem with an increasing amount of biomass, right? So she sees a problem because within a biomass, we can create some biodiesels and bio or eco-friendly materials from the biomass. But she's saying that it's increasing amount of biomass as a problem, right? And what do you think her proposed solution to that is? Now, you know where to read, right? You can probably solve this right away. So what you can do is you can probably go back the passage and see that particular part of the passage and find the answer, right? So we know where that appears, biomass, right? Where does that appear? Of course, biomass appears in the very first paragraph. So we'll look at this paragraph. Let me raise this a little bit so that you could view this in a little more, I say, little more clear way. All right, so let's go. Here we go. All right, so we read that part, if anybody, that first paragraph, right? So biomass, it's us, and then to keep this no waste economy. So we'll read from there. Instead of a linear production system which binges on a virgin raw materials and spews out unusable waste, they envision a web of closed loops in which a minimum of raw materials comes in the door and very little waste escapes. The first example of this, which is Denmark, no Spanish, or no waste economy, in an eco park and blah blah blah. All right, so I guess this is sort of dealing with the question itself. And then as you can see here, her proposal is, of course, instead of using this system, right, we can use a system of closed loops in which the minimum of raw materials comes in the door and then very little waste escapes. So that's her way of proposal to the solution of the problem, right? Okay, so if you got that or register that into your head, let's see. F. Change the process by which manufacturers produce their products. That's a possibility because after all, we're changing the processing product, right? The 3 bars. G. Make consumers responsible for recycling the products they buy. Well, we already are responsible, or at least we're not given a choice between, recycling products or whatnot. So therefore, this is definitely getting 1 bar. H. Encourage traditional businesses to compete with new innovative businesses. Not really. We're not talking about traditional companies with the innovative new companies. I mean, even the new companies are not really interested in the environment so far. So 1 bar, excuse me. J. Encourages companies that produce similar products to cluster together in eco-parks. Okay, that's a possibility. I guess we're talking about that anyways. That's her proposed solution to it, right? So is it either F or is it J, right? That's the idea, F or J, because these two have a low bars, and so therefore we're not going to consider that as one of our answers, but the F and J. So F says change the process by which the manufacturers produce their products. Should we change the process by which, or production lines? Well, that's a little shaky, right? She doesn't say let's change it, or at least that's what she's sort of proposing in the first paragraph. This one is definitely, this seems like an answer because we know that there's a 4 company, encourage companies that produce similar products to cluster together in the eco parks. But if you read it carefully, it says encourage the companies that produce similar products to cluster together in eco park. That's not true. Similar product, I mean, you saw the 4 companies. The 4 companies were Asnæs Verket Power Plant, Zipbrock, there was a Statoil refinery, and there were also this one other company, I forget the name, Novo Nordisk, right? All these 4 companies do different stuff, and so that's kind of out the window, right? Of course, so what you're left out with would be F, change the process by which, right? So if you were like considering whether F and J were the answer, right? Just like I was doing, right? That usually will happen because you see this and you're not reading this, but you're only reading, okay, encourage the companies that produce whatever to come together in an eco park. That's what you do, but don't draw conclusions too easy because usually, right, these words like similar products will be a problem or problematic. So therefore, what you need to do is you need to get rid of that, all right, try to take a look at that and see if you can really find that idea within the question, but that's not true. But this is definitely true because we are actually changing the process by which the manufacturers produce their goods, right? So that they will produce not many waste materials. They will use a little bit of raw materials, virgin raw materials, and that's what we're talking about, okay? So the answer will have to be F. All right, moving on to the next question. 15. Based on the passage, which of the following pairs of industries is shown to depend directly on one another for the production of their products? So we know the words and we know the names of these companies. Statoil, Gyproc, Asnæs Verket, and fish farmers, Novo Nordisk, and plant farmers, Statoil and Novo Nordisk. Now, one thing that you can really look into would be this right now, fish farmers. Now, we know that there are 4 industries or 4 companies, but it says industries, right? So definitely this is something to look at. It's worth considering, right? Okay. So in order to solve this question, we'll have to go back to the second and the third paragraph and find exactly what these companies do. All right, but it's going to take time. So what we're going to do is we're going to remember what we read, right? Remember what we read. What did we read? We read in the third paragraph, waste from the power company is used by Novo Nordisk, right, to heat the fermentation tanks. So if you draw up your conclusion a little bit, so the power company, I'll put it as no, I'll put it as ASNES. No, I'll just put it as ASNES, right? ASNES, whatever. Power company. And of course, Novo Nordisk, well, I'll put it as NN. Novo Nordisk are definitely directly related, right? Okay, definitely. That's true, right? And then if you look at now, Novo Nordisk or Novo bequeaths its free to nearby farmers. A pipeline delivers the fertilizer. So Novo Nordisk sends this to the farmers, not fish farmers, but farmers for fertilizers. So they're directly related, all right? And then Statoil refinery waste gas, they purify it, and some is used internally by fuel, and some is piped to the power company. So Statoil to power company, back to the S power company again. They're directly related. And then, of course, and the rest goes to the Gyprock. So Gyprock is one of those, right? So as Statoil refinery to Gyprock, right? They are directly related because some of these gas goes to Gyprock, then the wallboard the maker next door, and then the sulfur squeezed from the gas during purification is loaded onto the trucks and sent to the Kemira, a company that produces a sulfuric acid. The power company also squeezes sulfur from its emissions, but converts most of it to calcium sulfate, and which it sells to Gyprock on wallboarding. So power company, the S power company to Gyprock. Okay, so we've established some of the direct relationships. The power company to the Novo Nordisk to the farmers, Statoil refinery to the power company, Statoil refinery to Gyprock, and the power company to the Gyprock, right? Okay, now what we need to do is try to find those relationships. So if you take a look at the relationship here, Statoil to Gyprock, was that one of our relationships? Was there a relationship between Statoil and Gyprock? Yes, there was, right? Sort of, because that's what the gases, the used up gases goes to Gyprock, right? Okay. And then, but you need to remember this directly one another, right? So, and then the NS Verket and the fish farmers. Now, fish farmers is sounding a little, right, weird, so let's not use that. Now, C, Novo Nordisk and plant farmers, yes, there was. But plant farmers don't do anything for them because plant farmers, of course, they just receive fertilizers, right? I mean, you need to read that part, one another, right? So that's important. And then D says Statoil and Novo Nordisk. So Statoil and Novo Nordisk, well, you can't really see the relationship in between them. So for now, the best answer should be Statoil and Gyprock in a sense, because Statoil is, Statoil sends the unused or not completely used gas, right, to Gyprock, and then Gyprock, the one thing that we need to make sure is that Gyprock is whether contributing to Statoil refinery. So let's go back and see if Gyprock somehow is contributing to the refinery itself, right? So we don't really have that, right? We have this relationship right here, right? So let's see if Gyprock is somehow doing that, right? So sulfur squeezed from this gas is sent to the Kemira company, produces sulfuric acid, and then the power company also squeezes sulfur from it, and then Gyprock for wallboarding. So wallboard. So therefore, it not really is, right? It's not really that part where Statoil refining company is somehow benefiting the Gyprock, and Gyprock is benefiting back to the Statoil refinery. That's not really true, right? So let's see if that's the answer. So far we've been drawing up this answer, right? So is that an answer? No, right? Why is that? Because there is no direct relationship. So we dismissed this as one of our answers. So let's see why we have dismissed it, and let's see why this could be our answer. Again, there was a relationship between the two because Novo Nordisk were producing fertilizers, and fertilizers were sent to farmers, right? Okay, so let's see that part. Why is that our answer? So let's go to this part. Again, here Novo Nordisk. So Novo Nordisk bequeaths it free to the nearby farmers, and a pipeline delivers the fertilizers to growing plants, which are in turn harvested to feed the bacteria in the fermentation tanks. So, that's the idea. So that's why that becomes our answer. So what happens? Let's try erasing this and try to show you exactly what happens, right? Okay, so what happens is that the fertilizers that were made, right? So if there was a fertilizer that was made, so I'll write just ferty. So if there was a fertilizer that was made from Novo Nordisk, this is pipelined to the farmers. Of course, to the farmers for farming, of course, right? And once these fertilizers are being used, right, delivered, and which are in turn harvested, right? These fertilizers later on harvested to feed the bacteria, right? Which will in turn will be used to ferment that again. So this is a closed loop, right? They will continue to feed each other of the necessary parts. And so, therefore, the answer, although we have chosen Statoil and Gyproc as quite possible answer, but again, there was no real relationship between Gyproc and Statoil, because Statoil was the only one that produced or at least provided the gas, and Gyproc sort of like, benefited from it. And of course, there's no relationship between these two. And yes, there could be relationship between these two, but not really right now. The only relationship that you can see would be Novo Nordisk and the plant farmers, right? Okay, so that's how you try to derive your answers, right? I mean, try to see what would be the best answer, okay? All right, let's move on to the next. The main function of the sixth paragraph, lines 58 and 64, in relation to the passage as a whole, is most likely to provide what, right? So the sixth paragraph, apparently 58 to 64, let's take a look at that, 58 to 64, which is located right here somehow, right? So far about recycling. So let's take a look at that. So we read that part already, right? And it says something about, yeah, so far we've been looking at this company, but I mean these companies, this group of a cluster of companies, but how about when the product leaves the producers and goes to the consumers, and the consumers throw it out in the trash, right? So we mentioned in the earlier that this was sort of a transition to the next idea. So is there a mention of the transition, because we're talking about the main function, the main function of the sixth paragraph. So therefore, is it an evidence to support Daniel Chara's statement in lines 54 and 67? Or is it transition between the two main points discussed in the passage? Or is it a conclusion to the author's discussion about an waste economy? Or is it a summary of the author's main argument? Definitely the answer has to be G, right? Because we saw that it was a transition in which they were talking about these four companies and how they were trying to create an equal part. And then that all of a sudden becomes, all of a sudden they say, but yeah, that's true, but then how about these? How about the consumers, right? How about what happens to the consumers when they throw out the, trash? And so that's a transition, definitely. So therefore, that is our best answer. Okay, good. Moving on to the next. 17. According to the passage, take-back laws in Germany shift the responsibility for recycling from the what to what. So take-back laws, I mean, common sense tells you when you say take-back, companies will produce, right, product, and they will be sold to the consumers, right? And if the consumers believe that if the consumers believe that they're not recyclable enough, they will have to take back, right? So therefore, is it local government to the manufacturer? Is it manufacturer to the local government? Or is it manufacturer to the consumers? Or is it consumers to the manufacturers? So who has the responsibility? It's not the consumers who are having the responsibility, but it's the manufacturers who are having the responsibility, right? If they have to take back. So of course the answer is D. So it's shifting the responsibility from consumers to the manufacturers, because it's the manufacturers who are making things in a very, very wasteful manner. I mean, for example, let's say you're trying to buy let's say a bottle of perfume, and bottle of perfume does not need to be within a paper cardboard boxing. It doesn't have to be, because it's already in glass, right? It doesn't break that easy. I mean, paper cardboard boxing will not protect, well, it could protect it. I'm pretty sure that's why they put it, but it doesn't really protect it, but it just shows its brand, right? So therefore, that's what we're talking about. So consumers now don't have to worry about it, right? It's the manufacturers not making those extra boxings, extra wrapping boxes, right? So that they will not waste any products or materials, right? So therefore the answer has to be D. Simple as that. We didn't even have to go back to the passage, right? Okay, number 18. According to the passage, the common element for companies that want to be part of a food web is their mutual interest in. We read that part. You definitely remember this, right? Where do we read that part? We read that part. I mean, that mutual part. I mean, that just sparkles in your head, because right here, right? So it says, when the onus shifts in this way, it's suddenly in the company's best interest to design a product that will either last a long time or come apart easily for recycling or reuse. Oh, that probably was not. We read this part somewhere. I'm sorry. This is, I probably were thinking wrong. I think there was a part where it talks about, oh, there, I'm sorry, this is the part, I'm sorry, totally got that wrong. So this paragraph does talk about that, right? So it says it doesn't really need to be geographically close to operate in that closed loop. All they need to have is the desire to use waste materials, or reduce the waste materials, or use a little bit of virgin raw material. So therefore we get that idea. All right, so if that's the idea, let's take a look at that. FoodWeb, is there mutual interest in what? Relocating their operations to a common geographic area in Europe? Not really, because we read that was not true. They don't have to be within a geographical region. No. Provide industrial waste to private homes and farming operations? Well, maybe not. All right, so let's use one. Eliminating the need for the raw materials? Not true, because the raw materials are definitely needed. So let's just cross it out. Using industrial waste as a raw materials? Well, that's a possibility, right? Because we read that it's their desire to use waste. And so, which one? Definitely the 2 marks, right? Definitely the 2 marks. So that should be your answer. All right, good. Moving on to the next question, number 19. The author uses the term design offal, right? Line 51 to indicate. So what's that design offal supposed to be? So let's go to line 51. Line 51 tells us something about the design offal. But remember, if it talks about the design offal, so let's just try to read that part. So we'll read from here, okay? In this game of design offal, a process with lots of waste, as long as it's wanted waste, may be better than one with a small amount of waste that must be landfilled or burned, right? So I guess we're talking about if you interpret that idea, so if the designing somehow happens and there are a lot of waste materials that are created after the use of that product, and if a lot of waste materials could be reused, it's better to have that than having a product which will leave small waste material, but that had to be landfilled, thrown out or buried underground or burned, right? It's much better. That's what they're saying. So what is this design offal, right? So let's take a look at that part and see what that means. So here it says design offal is author uses them to indicate what? Companies can design ways in which their waste products can be used. Or is it industrial ecologists have designed ways to reduce waste products? Or is it technology has not kept pace with how to dispose of the waste products? Or is it companies can learn to design more efficient landfill spaces? Well, right off the bat, we can take care of this because it's not the landfill spaces, although landfill appears there, right? That's not true. Is it technology has not kept pace with how to dispose of the waste products? Well, we'll give it a 1 bar because we're talking about the designed offal, right? We're talking about actual designing of the product in which the waste materials could be reused again. Industrial ecologists have designed ways to reduce waste products, or is it companies can design ways in which their waste products can be used, right? So therefore, the answer, of course, has to be A, because we're talking about reusable energy, right? Or reusable waste materials. That's at least what we read, because the companies will have to, design it in such ways so that it should be reused, not small amount of waste materials that cannot be used, right? So therefore, the answer has to be A, definitely. All right, moving on to the last question. According to Daniel Chiraz, a failed technologist won that. All right, let's just common sense this, all right? So whoever Daniel Chiraz was, all right, or Kiraz, or whatever his name is, or her name, or his name is, whatever his name is, let's try to common sense this and try to see, all right? So apparently, Daniel Chiraz is probably a proponent of the no waste economy. That's just no-brainer, right? And then it says a failed technology is that cannot reuse its own waste, produces more waste than it uses, produces waste that is unusable, or makes durable goods such as refrigerators. So definitely not, of course. Cannot reuse its own waste? Well, I guess. And then produces more waste than it uses? Well, I guess. And then produces waste that is unusable? Probably, right? But so far, you've read this entire, or you've at least trying to map it out, right? So far, what do you think is the main idea, right? Or at least the companies we're talking about was one thing. And then the second thing, of course, we're talking about this, consumers and the producers and whatnot, right? So which one of these should be your answers? Of course, let's guess your answer has to be definitely this, right? Because we're talking about unusables. We're not talking about more waste than it uses. Not really. We're not talking about more waste or smaller waste, because either more or smaller, we're talking about reusable waste materials. cannot reuse its own waste. Well, a technology that cannot reuse its own waste is not a failed technology because it's a really difficult process, right? So a failed technology is one that produces waste that's non-usable or unusable, right? That's the failed one. This is not particularly a failed technology because some of the waste material you cannot just reuse it, right? So therefore, making this would be that idea. All right. So the answer had to be H. All right. So you've seen here within this passage that all you needed was sort of a broad knowledge on this biomass, the technologies that are involved, or at least the pictures that you have to draw between the companies and how these companies are related, right? And all these could have been done within a few minutes of time. If you spend a few minutes of time just reading the important parts of the passage, this should come as of no surprise. All right. So I want you to keep on practicing this pattern. All right. This pattern will get shorter and shorter and shorter, and will give you a lot of time. It will give you an extra time when you're tackling the reading passage, and also will give you an accurate answer and an easier way of answering those questions. All right, the next time we're going to talk about, or we're going to at least go into another one of these social studies questions or social study passages and try to see if we can make use of this pattern over and over and over again, and maybe it can suit you in the future, in the near future as well. All right, this has been Isaac, and thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.